When I was a young kid in the 1980s, I would look at stills of Max's original vehicle in the first Mad Max film and note two things. Number one, his car had his name on it. In front of the driver's door, there it was, M. Rockatansky. This was definitely Max, as besides clearly being his car, there's a line delivered by the Fifi character later in the film when Max quits his job. He says, "You'll be back, Rockatansky. You're hooked, Max, and you know it." I would proudly tell kids in my class at school that Mad Max's real name was Max Rockatansky, and most of them wouldn't believe me. Kids. Number two. Under Max's name it also said The Dark One. At first I took this to be some sort of call sign for Max, not dissimilar to Top Gun where you had Lieutenant Pete Mitchell, Maverick, on the side of that character's F-14 Tomcat. Or even potentially that it was the name of the car, given that the other cars earlier in the film also had names such as the Big Bopper and the March Hare. But no, later in the film, after Jesse has an encounter with the toe cutter gang at the beach, Max clearly tells the Mae Swayze character, that's the old woman at the farm where they're staying, to call the Dark One.
Mae, you call the Dark One, and you tell him to get here as fast as he can.
So it's definitely someone who isn't Max. It's not his call sign. So who is the Dark One? The Dark One is apparently a character who had more of a role in earlier versions of the Mad Max screenplay. Remember that scene where Goose is telling the guy in the diner about someone hitting a tree in their car and being thrown out, then back through the windshield, trying to scream with his face ripped off? That's supposedly a story about the Dark One. Now, you wouldn't know it to look at the final edit of the film. You just think it's some random story Goose is telling about his service with the Main Force Patrol to put a guy off his breakfast. But no, the story goes that the Dark One was Max's partner, just like we see the other MFP guys driving in pairs earlier in the film, like Roop and Charlie and Sas and Scuttle. I presume the accident where the Dark One was badly injured is the reason why Max is to be found driving alone at the start of the film. Instead, the vibe we get, sans the Dark One being part of the story now, is that Max is just a lone wolf, and even though everyone else works in pairs, he doesn't. We'd apparently see the Dark One later in the film, apparently filmed in such a way to suggest his horrific injuries, perhaps without showing their full extent. Some internet sources even suggest he'd be wearing a prosthetic nose. This is the part of the film where Max finds the biker Kundalini's hand attached to a chain at the back of his panel van, having had it ripped off in an earlier scene. In the finished film, however, we just have a local policeman come and collect it with the very dry line, "Well, unless someone makes a claim for it, I figure it's lost property." This character is known as Ziggy in the credits, and also delivers a line to Jesse, "If Ziggy says so, it's okay." So he's definitely Ziggy, not the Dark One, yet he clearly knows the Mae Swayze character, as he also tells Max and Jesse that Mae is expecting them at the farm. So the effect is that Ziggy is basically playing the role intended for the Dark One here, but as a different character. It's also worth noting the Mad Max novelization, which I know many people don't own, where the scene plays out as being an interaction between Max, Jesse, and the Dark One, not Ziggy, but there's no mention of any disfigurement or that he really knows Max at all. On pages 137 through 138, the scene plays out thus. Quote, "At last a battered police car pulled up in the drive. At the wheel was a semi-retired officer, known throughout the force as the Dark One. He greeted Max and Jesse with a sort of understated warmth, and quickly examined the contents of the bag. Jesse flew into a rapid explanation punctuated by his nods, then trailed off to look at the bag again. "Well," he said after a few seconds' pause, "as far as I'm concerned, it's lost property, and unless someone makes a claim on it, I say we can forget all about it." "Sounds okay to me," Max replied. Of course, if that idiot is stupid enough to report it, you can charge him anyway, as a result of what they tried to do to Jesse. Sure, I'm certain they've already thought of that. We'll never hear from them, you can count on that. What do you think, Jesse? Max asked. Well, I guess that's all we can do. But tell me, why do they call you the Dark One? He picked up his cap, scuffed his boots, and pulled the keys from his pocket. As he reached over to pick up the package, he looked up at her. Sweetheart, when I was coming up, they reckoned I was the darkest, lowest, meanest man on the road. I guess they were right, 'cause I'm also the oldest. He called goodbye over his shoulder as he walked out into the heat and flies. Max took Jessie by the arm and steered her towards the door. End quote. So there's yet another version of this character. As to why the Dark One character was cut out of the film, I have no knowledge. I guess it's just an element that's not really needed. Things are certainly simpler if the cop we see later in the film is just a guy called Ziggy rather than some bloke with a prosthetic nose who has a close relationship with Max. Where is that meant to go as we rocket into the final section of the film? It's a bad place to introduce a new character who is meant to be important to our leading man, especially if he doesn't have any role to play. What I can't understand, however, is why they left the line in where Max tells May to call the Dark One.
May, you call the Dark One, and you tell him to get here as fast as he can.
He should be telling her to call Ziggy. It could have even been overdubbed in post, yet it wasn't, and so it remains to this day that there's apparently a character out there called the Dark One. His name is on Max's car. May knows him, she's told to call him, but he doesn't appear in Mad Max at all. Just one of the many ambiguous aspects of the Mad Max franchise.